Remnant 2 is one of the most pleasant surprises to release in 2023. This is due to many different reasons that we will of course discuss throughout the video, but I think the biggest reason is due to expectation management. The developers were not out and about overhyping and overpromising features associated with their game, and if we're being honest, there wasn't even that much marketing for it at all. Hell, I don't even think we had a proper release date until like a month or so before the game even launched. Back when Remnant from the Ashes came out a few years ago, most people, myself included, were absolutely blown away with what Gunfire Games had created. And to be quite honest, all Gunfire had to do was just create the exact same game again, just slap Remnant 2 on it and call it a day. But they didn't do that, and they actually went above and beyond what any Remnant fan could have ever asked for, delivering one of the best experiences that is endlessly replayable and rich with content that puts most AAA gaming companies to shame. Now, for those of you who are unaware, Remnant is a franchise that has somehow captured not only lightning in a bottle, but has brought an original spin to the Souls-like genre. They did this by fusing the best of the punishing and overpowered mechanics, combining it with the fast and free-flowing gameplay, puzzles, and tons of amazing Easter eggs to find. They also use guns. Lots of guns. And instead of going bigger, the developers took a different approach and made everything much more dense. And this was 100% the correct choice. By avoiding the creation of a vast, ever-expanding landscape with nothing to explore, Gunfire Games made sure that every square inch of this game was packed with content and littered with secrets and some of the best rewards in the entire game. And while the content offered here is very substantial, it's quite a hefty mountain to climb for a casual fan such as myself who wants to experience everything the game has to offer but may not have the time to do so. A game this dense can be overwhelming, as each of the 49 boss encounters, procedurally generated worlds, multiple narrative paths, and secret loot to unlock are puzzles to solve within themselves, which ultimately becomes fatiguing as the possibilities are seemingly endless. There is a lot of game here, and to be honest with you guys, I wasn't expecting the Remnant rabbit hole to go down as deep as it does. But that doesn't make the game bad, by the way, because boiled down to its most fundamental principles, Remnant 2 is a wonderful and amazingly put together product that allows older fans who love the series to sink their teeth into something familiar while giving newer fans an experience that they will never forget. Before we dive into the specifics, I would like to clarify a bit more on why I feel like Remnant 2 can be so fatiguing at times, because I can't be the only person out there who feels this way, and if I am, well, damn, I guess I'm just the odd one out. That being said, as a reviewer, I think it's important to be able to say whether or not something is objectively good, regardless of how I personally feel about the actual experience. I mean, take a look at the Steam reviews. The game is sitting pretty at above an 80%. Truth be told, there is only so much bandwidth to invest into games that are designed like this. The depth of the Easter eggs and secrets combined with badass combat and boss encounters is literally 100% up my alley and is everything that I love in video games. But the reality is, in order to experience Remnant 2 in all of its magnificence, you have to play through it multiple times to truly appreciate it all. And I'm totally fine with that, and I'm happy that Remnant fans are getting that game. They deserve that game. But for me, I was simply looking for something a little more linear where I wouldn't have to replay most of the game in order to try everything out. And to be fair, Gunfire has clearly thought about players like me, as there are quite a few mechanics that allow for a kind of traditional linear experience. However, that is completely overshadowed by the core foundation of the game, which is based in replayability, alternate choice making, and the end game grind. And let me clarify, the devs made the correct choice here, and just because I'm not fully co-signing things doesn't mean that I hate the game or think that it's bad, because it certainly isn't. But for people like me who are just not in the right headspace for a game like this, I think this is important to mention, as Remnant 2 isn't a game that you just run through one time and that's the end of it. It's a dense, beautiful, chaotic world that deserves your full attention. I think we should start with performance, as this has been a sticking point for many people online. The discourse around this, I think, has been largely negative, but overall the game has performed quite well for me. I played on PC using an RTX 3080 Ti, was playing at 4K max settings with DLSS set to performance, and was getting anywhere from 60 to 100 FPS depending on the environment, particle effects, enemy density, density, things like that. But sometimes there was a jump from that 60 to 100 FPS, and it could be staggering at times. But I will say there wasn't a lot of screen tearing or anything like that, as the game was smooth most of the time. But like I said, there were a few instances that I noticed frame drops in the middle of a boss fight during a major attack, and losing those frames would actually cause me to take damage because I wasn't able to dodge correctly due to that particular performance dip, which is actually pretty detrimental to the gameplay. I also tested this game on gaming handhelds, both the Steam Deck and ROG Ally, and it ran like absolute trash. So while it may be cool to play Remnant 2 in bed, it will not be worth your time until Gunfire does some serious tuning with AMD's fidelity mode. Another thing I'd like to point out is an issue with corrupted save files, as unfortunately this happened to my game. I had initially started Remnant 2 at launch and was about 3 or 4 hours in, and I wanted to go play on my laptop in my bedroom, and my game was just not there. I spent some time trying to fix it, jumping between machines, and it was causing me a ton of headaches, and at one point I even lost my entire save file on my main character due to the data corruption with Gunfire Games servers. But don't fret, there is a fix for this, as the devs have addressed this on their Twitter, so if you do have any issues, go over to their page and just follow the steps. They did help me and I got my game fully back. So we have talked a lot about how great Remnant 2 is, how packed full of content it is, and how it's performing. But what exactly do you do in the game? Well, after you create your character, select your difficulty, and go through the tutorial, you will enter a random realm to begin the campaign on a semi-exclusive, procedurally generated layout. And when you enter the realm for the first time, you will generally spawn by a large crystal, as this crystal is what allows us to save, teleport between realms, and of course is our respawn beacon for when we inevitably die and have to start over. The structure of a realm is fairly simple actually. There is a primary objective point you want to strive for, but along the way you will find side paths and detours filled with secondary objectives, Easter eggs, and plenty of enemies to mess up your day. The classes that Remnant 2 offers at the earlier menu is fairly limited, as choosing between a hunter, handler, medic, and a challenger are your only 4 options initially, but I think providing less selection fatigue is a good thing since you're going to be thrown in the deep end shortly after. Each class starts with its own special trait card, plus a few generic ones like health and stamina, etc., which you can dump your stat points into. The classes are also all equipped with 3 special abilities you can eventually change at any time, and 4 passive perks that are simultaneously active. These abilities and perks are able to be unlocked as you level up throughout the game, giving you tons of variety in your playthrough. But the customization doesn't stop there. You can actually merge your classes together, change your initial class later down the line entirely, and you can unlock secret classes simply by playing the game and finding Easter eggs, which you love to see this kind of stuff. The goal of the game is to move from section to section inside a particular realm, conquering the various dungeons, side missions, and main bosses in order to complete it and move on to the next one. I would say all in all, completing the main campaign from start to finish isn't very long. I bet most people could run through all the main objectives in like 10 to 12 hours, maybe even less if they weren't exploring anything. But once you have completed a particular section or the main campaign in general, you can either re-roll your campaign or participate in something called Adventure Mode, which allows you to hop back into a realm that you really loved and have a completely different experience. Not only are you going to have new procedurally generated layouts, but you will be able to focus on leveling up new classes, weapons, and grinding salvage while gaining access to never-before-seen areas to explore, new bosses, and new rewards. And when I say new rewards, I truly mean rewards. This game brings no in-game monetization or battle pass, none of that garbage. In fact, everything that you earn in the game is unlockable through your playtime. So it's truly up to you how much time you want to spend uncovering the secrets that Gunfire hid around their maps. Now, I don't want to focus too heavily on this subject because I really want players to discover things for themselves. But just know, when you start that second playthrough, it's not going to be exactly like your first one. There's going to be new decision paths that you can make when you're having conversations with NPCs. You will stumble upon entirely new areas, even some that are hidden, that will lead to a new secret item or a puzzle that you weren't able to solve or acquire through your first run. Remnant 2 is a game that isn't afraid to reward the player for their time and effort. Gunfire wants you to experiment. They want you to try different things and to play the game in ways that you never thought of previously, and I am totally here for it. Most games that come out nowadays love to jam in some wild story and tons of lore that is generally dog water and more or less unnecessary. I will say that there is a story here in Remnant 2, and if you want to dig deeper, you most certainly can, but what I find more compelling is Gunfire Games' heavy emphasis on artistic vision and gameplay, as that is what I feel most connected to with this type of video game. It's clear that the devs put forth a lot of their time and resources into their art and world design, as it truly is on par with some of the best work you will find in the AAA gaming landscape. In Remnant 2, there are only 5 realms for you to choose from, and I know that doesn't sound like a lot, and that's because it isn't. And like I mentioned in the introduction, Gunfire chose a different route when it came to developing their game. A more dense environmental structure with rich gameplay mechanics is what they set their sights on, and they most certainly achieved that. While I do think the game is quite fatiguing at times, having fewer realms to explore with this much variation between them is probably a good thing. I couldn't imagine if there were 8 worlds with this much content packed into it. I don't think anybody would ever be able to finish the game. But on the flip side of the same coin, it could have been amazing to have a few more realms simply to just see what is going on in the mind of Gunfire, because let's face it, their world design is beautiful and it's an absolute joy to get sucked into it. But the top tier design doesn't stop there, as the developers are also masters of the actual level layouts as well. While you're playing Remnant 2, you'll be running around, twisting and turning through crazy corridors, and while you feel like you're lost at times, it couldn't be anything further from the truth. Here is a prime example. The dungeon you're seeing on screen starts you off just like any other dungeon. As you make your way through the opening section, you notice there is a structure in front of you with a door. Now, you can go straight if you want, but the door is locked, so while there are subtle cues to initially veer to the right, that is the direction that you actually must head. And as you weave through passageways, battling enemies and uncovering amazing secrets, you realize that you have just circled back to not only the objective point, but to the back side of that locked door. The way Gunfire Games inches you along subtly with colors, lights, sounds, and enemy design is done with such elegance. Never at any point do things feel heavy-handed where there is a big arrow that's pointing at where you should go. The devs simply allow the player to sit for a minute and think about what their next move should be, and once that immersion kicks in and the real world melts from around your monitor, you suddenly realize that you are following the path that the devs wanted you to take all along. If you have already played Remnant from the Ashes before this, then you already know walking into this game that the combat here is seriously top fucking notch. Shooting, dodging, sprinting, jumping, using abilities, it all just works together so damn well. There is genuinely never a moment where you feel like you're losing control of your character, which is imperative in a game of this caliber. And the combat itself is its own mini sandbox where you can mix and match tons of different gameplay options to have the ultimate experience that you really want. So I personally started the game off as the Handler, which is the class that has the dog companion. As the game progressed, I unlocked secret classes and the ability to merge classes, which allowed me to change my entire playstyle from the one that I started with. The same goes for weapons too. As you collect resources from various realms, you can come back to the central hub and upgrade them, craft weapon mods, and passive buffs called mutators. This customization, combined with the ability to purchase a variety of different weapons, weapon upgrades and mods, and wearable buffs, really pushes for such diversity in character builds that I think it's going to take a pretty long time to figure out what the actual meta is for this game. Unfortunately, the system isn't perfect, and in order to experience every facet of the game, you do have to grind a bit, and its in-game economy is heavily reliant on that sect of replayability. But again, that is the whole point of a game like this, so if that's something that turns you off, then maybe this game isn't meant for you right now, which I completely understand. And while it can be slightly limiting if you really only want to run through this game once, I still think that Gunfire did a great job accommodating those who don't want to sink in a bunch of time. So what do I mean by that? Well, we have to talk about the game's XP system and the in-game economy. This is probably my least favorite aspect of Remnant 2, but as I've said a million times in this video, I understand why Gunfire made the decisions that they did, and for the hardcore fans of this franchise, it is the right call to make. Remnant 2's in-game economy is heavily reliant on salvage, which is the world's currency. Now, clearly an in-game currency isn't a bad thing to have, but earning it at an exponentially slow rate can leave a bit of a tedious feeling at times. That being said, if the player could sell more items for salvage, I think it would really help alleviate that punishing earning rate. Things like weapons, amulets, rings, and stuff like that are unable to be sold to any of the vendors, or at least any that I could find. In fact, you're only able to sell other resources that you have, most of which you need to actually upgrade your items in the game, leaving the system to feel somewhat insincere. The same thing occurs with unlocking new classes in the game as well. So when you start with your main class at the beginning of the game, you're earning XP at a normal rate since you are playing that class from the start. But once you are able to purchase a second class or even a new class, you are limited in your ability to earn XP without having to replay the entire game over again, as the length of the main campaign is rather short. Obviously, being able to upgrade 3 classes to the max in one run is a bit excessive, and I'm not asking for that. But since the game is predicated around having 2 classes semi-merged together, I do think you should be able to level up both throughout one campaign playthrough. And while a game based on such high replay value is inherently going to have different economic structures within it, I think there could be some compromise, especially when it comes to earning salvage. Now, as far as the actual skill tree goes in the game, it's fairly straightforward. Like I said a bit ago, whatever class you start with, you will acquire a specific trait card that is paired with that particular class, and as you level up your character, that specific ability will become increasingly better. What's kind of cool about these traits is you don't have to waste your skill points on them, as they will just level up via gameplay, which leaves room for you to dump your points into other places, giving your build more variety. I really like this system, and I think it plays quite nicely. At the start of the game, I felt like my dog companion was rather weak and didn't really do very much, but eventually he became so overpowered and was destroying enemies without my character even engaging with them, and the dog was even taking down some low-level bosses, so your upgrades are most certainly felt. You will also unlock more traits during your playthrough aside from health and stamina, and some of these are class specific traits, but you will have the option to customize your build however you want for your optimal experience. And sure, the traits are nice and everything, but there are actually even more ways to buff your character that can allow you to compensate in case you made a mistake along the way, or perhaps you want to create a build where you offset stats or just min-max certain things. These are, of course, Remnant's take on wearables. We have already touched on the modifiers that can be attached to your weapons, but there are a bunch of elements that can be attached to your character as well. Every character has 1 amulet slot, 4 ring slots, and a relic slot. The amulet is usually a multi-purpose buff, and the rings will have 1 stat associated with each ring, and in my opinion, they're all pretty substantial upgrades that really do make a difference in gameplay. I have had rings that give me more heal charges, 30% more ranged combat damage, 20% increased speed with consuming items, and this stuff adds up quick, and a lot of these things can stack onto one another, and it's really overpowered. I love this system. The relics, on the other hand, are a little bit different as they are your main source of healing. Each player starts out with 3 relic charges per life, and the only way to replenish your charges is to go to a nearby crystal and interact with it, which will of course respawn all of the enemies that you had just killed. But there is good news. Relic charges can be upgraded, and the player can earn new relic types by beating certain bosses, allowing them to heal in different ways or focus on buffing other aspects of their build. Of course, there is the standard relic charge that heals the character 70 HP over a short period of time, but I personally had a special relic that would heal my character approximately 30% of my health meter and then shoot out 3 healing orbs that I could collect within a certain period of time, which would always heal my character to full health. The player can also add modifications to the relic that help boost various stats and weapon mods, really allowing you to fine-tune the specifics to how you like them. This game is just truly remarkable with how much detail and effort went into these systems. Sure, I wish there was a higher salvage earn rate, and I wish that I could sell certain weapons and amulets to vendors inside of the main hub, but I understand exactly why Gunfire created the systems the way that they did. The sole purpose is replayability, exploration, and a breadth of customization options that give the player a different lens of perspective for every single playthrough. The enemy design in Remnant 2 is top-notch, as you would expect. There is a pretty wide variety of enemy types, from your easy popcorn enemies to your heavy bosses and of course your realm bosses. Generally speaking, the lower level enemies don't have too many different attack types. Maybe some will have more health than others or a special attack here and there, but for the most part they are totally manageable. You just have to be mindful with crowd control. The real challenge starts at the end of each realm or dungeon when you're fighting a big daddy boss. And believe me when I say that the devs really went all out with the bosses in this game. I think I saw a video on YouTube saying that there are around 49 different boss encounters in this game, which is absolutely insane. And as you would expect by now, all of these bosses are not able to be accessed through one playthrough, meaning that you will have to re-roll the campaign or play adventure mode to do so. But just because a game has 49 bosses doesn't mean that they're all great boss encounters, does it? Well, actually, most of the boss encounters I have had in this game have been pretty damn great. They are wild, they are crazy, and you will die a lot. However, the amount of boss encounters you're going to run into in just a couple of hours of gameplay is another reason why this game can be so exhausting. Not only are you having crazy battles with regular enemies, but these boss fights are no joke. Learning their patterns can be pretty difficult, and after you spend 10, 20, 30 minutes finally learning all their moves, you move on to the next leg of the campaign and are fighting another boss in just a few moments, and you're just doing that whole process all over again with your brain. It's crazy overstimulation, and at times, I would just turn off my computer and go talk to a girl or touch grass or something. That being said, the thing I like about Remnant's boss fights versus a game like Elden Ring is the pacing. Remnant's boss fights are much quicker, and you can feel yourself learning the new mechanics each time, so it feels very rewarding as you are dying and respawning. There are also a few fights that are just absolutely terrible, and I'm going to try to explain the difference between one of the better fights versus one of the more insane fights that are trying to kick a man while he's down. One of the better bosses in the game is the Corrupted Ravager. This is the big dog kangaroo monster that has a giant red sack on his back who charges at you and all that good stuff. This fight is really well designed, as the devs made sure to create clear and concise rules for the fight that slowly reveal piece by piece as the fight unfolds. The devs have you start off in an arena with pillars that help block his attacks, but as time goes on, the Ravager destroys them, leaving you exposed, but increases your awareness and space to move. He also has really well telegraphed attacks and will throw out small enemies that distract you from his patterns, but will reward you with ammo. And that is the song and dance essentially. Punish the player, but if they succeed at dodging that punishment, they are rewarded. Do you see the back and forth here? I think that is a perfect boss design philosophy, and Gunfire Games shows that they understand it very well, as they execute it perfectly more times than not. Another element to boss encounters that are super important is the actual environment or arena layout that the player is fighting in. And this is where Remnant 2 can falter at times, as occasionally Gunfire will stuff you in these terrible arenas that don't allow for great movement or gameplay with the specific boss that you're fighting. The Venom boss fight is a great example of this, where the area causes harm to the actual experience, since there is no play in the engagement between the player and the enemy AI. This boss can not only travel vertically and horizontally over the one area you have to protect yourself from him, but he can fire off his attacks from any location on the map. He can also drop your ammo pickups on the top of the roof structure in the middle of the arena, which is the structure that you can't climb up, leaving you depleted of ammo by the end of the fight. Now, realistically, on paper, none of this is problematic for me. My issue is with the lack of reward. The whole point of Remnant 2's boss structure is if punishment is escaped, you are rewarded for your skills via a positive gameplay mechanic. And if you only punish and you don't provide any incentive for outsmarting that negative behavior, then there is no real incentive for besting the situation other than just to beat it and move on. I want to be very clear here. From my experience, this occurs very rarely, as I can only think of 2 or 3 instances that really made me unhappy while playing them. I would say a majority of the bosses that I have played bring about a very good experience, and quite frankly, I don't expect any gaming studio to outline and design nearly 50 boss encounters perfectly, and I also expect some level of experimentation for the devs so they can learn what to do and what not to do in the future. But listen, this is a boss-heavy game. It's all about clearing those realms and getting to the final encounter while demolishing everything in your path on the way there. It's an extremely fun yet frustrating experience, which is why I definitely recommend taking your time and not beating your head up against a wall. If you have made it this far into the video, you might be a little confused about how I feel about Remnant 2. On one hand, I'm saying how it's one of the best video games I have ever played, and on the other, I'm saying how it's super dense and overwhelming. And that's simply because both of these things are true. There is so much content in this package to sift through, I almost don't even know where to begin. Between all of the hidden rewards, re-rolled realms, character customization, and boss encounters, it can be a lot. Which is why Remnant 2 is a game that I am going to be slowly chipping away at over the course of this year. Personally, I'm the type of player that likes to just jump into a game for a week or two and grind through the content and the story and just kind of move on to the next game. There are so many titles coming out this particular year and just in the marketplace in general that it is impossible to experience everything out there. And every now and again, I will come across a game that I love sinking my time into and playing it over and over again for years. but I already have a game that does that for me, and Remnant 2 isn't going to be replacing it. So yeah, I 100% recommend Remnant 2 for those looking for a fun, tough, rewarding game that doesn't hold your hand. A video game that has tons of replayability and some of the best boss fights you will find in all of gaming. It isn't often that games come out with this much passion, dedication, and that are nearly bug-free. And as I mentioned in the intro, Gunfire Games didn't overhype Remnant 2 because they didn't need to. They let the game do all of the talking and let the fans' experience and word of mouth spread around the globe. Gunfire Games have built something special that is going to be a cornerstone of the gaming industry for years to come, as not only have they set a great standard and precedent for business practices, but they are part of the trend that is helping to bring gaming back to what it's supposed to be. Thank you so much for watching. Here's another piece of content for you to check out, and I will see you in the next video.